All right. Good evening. I hope everyone is doing well. Tonight we're going to be learning Shabbos Daf Kuf Gimel. We're starting to speak about a variety of sugyas tonight, some a continuation from yesterday about Maseches and chiseling. And then we're going to get into some small Choresh issues. Then we're going to get into Kosev. And then tomorrow, Mir Hashem, we're going to be learning a very well-known daf about the shapes of the letters, and maybe even seemingly the Gemara is kind of getting into the machshava shel makom, like what HaKadosh Baruch Hu intended with the particular shapes that are evident in some of the letters. So we'll learn about that tomorrow night as well. Let's get started on the bottom of Kuf Beis and Beis, 4 lines from the bottom. Ba'amine Rav Nasan bar Oshia mi Rav Yochanan mesatis mishum mai mechayev. When someone chisels, what are they liable for? Now, this question is a little bit strange, because if you look up at the 2 dots about 15 lines above us, it already says Maseches mishum mai mechayev, and we said that it's a machlokas between Rab, who holds that a person who chisels has violated boneh, and Shmuel, who holds that it's makeh b'patish. So the Gemara then answers in the name of Rav Yochanan, ach ve'lei biyadeh. He made a motion with his hand. Rav Yochanan made a motion in his hand to answer this question, mishum makeh b'patish. Take a look at Rashi on the very last line of the page. Rashi says, ach ve'biyadeh makeh be'egrofo al kapo kim makeh b'patish. He took his hand and he hit his other hand to show it's like hitting with a hammer, namely, what's really happening here? Yes, the question was already asked, but a Talmud of Rav Yochanan didn't know the answer. He's in the Beis Medrash. He was, an Am Haaretz, relative to us. He was a huge Talmud Chacham, of course, no comparison. But he was just starting to learn under Rav Yochanan. So he said to his Rebbe, how do we paskin in regards to Rav and Shmuel? And with a hand motion, Rav Yochanan didn't say word, with a hand motion, he made it clear that Maseches, that chiseling, falls under the category of the Shita of Shmuel, and namely that we paskin like Shmuel, that we would hold that chiseling on Shabbos is not going to be boneh like Rav holds, but rather is going to be makeh b'patish. Asks the Gemara 2 lines from the bottom, but we said in our Mishnah, ha-Maseches v'ha-makeh b'patish. If you look all the way up at the top of this page, look at the second line of this page. It says v'ha-Maseches v'ha-makeh b'patish. So if you're going to say, Rav Yochanan, that we hold like Shmuel, that Maseches, that chiseling is because of makeh b'patish, so then we have a problem, because our Mishnah separates Maseches and makeh b'patish to be 2 different things. So how can you then say, Rabbi Yochanan, that we paskin like Shmuel, if Shmuel is basically saying that Maseches is makeh b'patish, when we actually already have a separate line of makeh b'patish in our Mishnah? Unacceptable answer. So then the Gemara says, you're right, Ema, therefore we need to correct the language of our Mishnah to say, ha-Maseches ha-makeh b'patish, the chiseler who was makeh b'patish, not 2 cases of one who chisels and one who is makeh b'patish. No, we fixed the language of the Mishnah to back the answer of Rav Yochanan back to his Talmud to say, Taka, we hold that when one chisels, they have not violated the Isser of Boneh like Rav says, but rather like Shmuel. Tashma, turning to the top of Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, hakodeach kolshu, we saw this already yesterday, that when one drills or makes a hole in something, the shear is a kolshu, and you'd be chayev. So ask the Gemara, Bishlam the Rav, if you want to say, according to Rav, who, as we saw in the previous Amud, holds that this Isser of kodeach, of drilling, is going to be one of boneh, that makes sense. Because kiman dechar churta levinyana, it's like making a hole. It's part of building a house is drilling. That's a normal function in the building process. Elo l'Shmuel, however, making a hole, Shmuel, you said it's makeh b'patish. What is makeh b'patish? Makeh b'patish is finishing off a malacha. But making a hole is not finishing off a malacha. That doesn't make any sense. Elo l'Shmuel, lav gemar malachahu. Making a hole is not finishing. How could you say makeh b'patish by the case of kodeach? So says the Gemara, good question. We're going to embrace your question and come back with an answer. You've changed our understanding of Shmuel. There are some questions that we say, too bad, your question was bad. Here we're saying we embrace your question, and your question made us have greater understanding in regards to the sheets of Shmuel. How so? Because, says the Gemara, Hachba Mayaskinan, de baze beramtza de farzala v'shavke begabe. De baze, You drilled in a ramsa de farzala. You drilled in a nail made out of metal. Vishavke bigave. You drilled a hole and put in the screw or put in the nail, whatever the mechanics were, and that is how we can still say that the case of kodea kolshehu, that making these tiny little holes, or about whatever size holes actually, making these holes could still be, according to Shmuel, who says makeh b'patish, because Shmuel was filling the holes with a nail, whatever it may be. Says the Gemara 5 lines down, Kuf Gimel Amid Aleph, Zeha Klal. We had said, if you look back in the Mishnah on the top of the previous Amud, we had a language of Zeha Klal. We said anyone who does a malacha and it's miskayim on Shabbos. Now, whenever the Mishnah says Zeha Klal, why this is the case is a good question, not for now. But whenever the Mishnah says Zeha Klal, the Gemara always asks, I shouldn't say always, but regularly asks, La Suye Mai. What case is a Mishnah coming to conclude? So Zeha Klal La Suye Mai, answers the Gemara, La Suye Dechak Kapiza Bekaba. When you take a log and you carve out some of the wood in order to make like a boat shape or a bowl shape, something along those lines, where you're taking the log and you've processed it somewhat. So why that's such a random case? You couldn't come up with something that was a little bit more general, such a specific case? That's the Asuye Mai of our Mishnah. Take a look at Rashi, who expands this idea a little bit more. Rashi to the right, up about a centimeter, Dechak Kapiza Bekaba, says the Gemara, Begolam Gadol, Hara'ui Lachupo Kav, Chakak Shalosh Lug, and you took a log and you cut out 3 lug of the wood from within the log. And here's the language that's important for us in regards to expanding this inclusion of our Mishnah. V'afal pisha asi lahosif, yesh shemekaimen kain. Even though you're likely to add the bells and whistles, you're going to add maybe some rings to hold the oars for the canoe. You're going to add a layer of varnish, whatever you're going to do. But we don't care, because, says Rashi, some people keep it that way. Namely, looking back in the Gemara, what does the Zeha Klal include? It includes items that are in process, even if they're not finished. As long as somebody uses them at that unfinished process, then that is going to be included in the La'asuye Mai of our Mishnah, to say that if you that is considered a complete malacha at that point. It's considered a complete malacha. Okay, so it says the Gemara, we're now 6-7 lines down. Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Hamake b'korna sal hasadan. We said yesterday that if a person were to take a hammer and bang it on an anvil, now when you bang something on an anvil, nothing happens. The anvil is solid metal, and the hammer is solid. I mean, you might see a spark, but nothing really changes, presumably. So then we did say that there is going to be a consequence. That our Mishnah says that you're chayiv in such a case, and the Mishnah used a strange language. It said, looking back on the top of Kuf Beis Medal, the last few words of the Mishnah, chayiv mibnei shu kimisakein malacha. It's like you're fixing the malacha. What is going on here? Says the Gemara, my ka'avid. When you take a hammer and you hit it on the anvil, what malacha have you done? Big deal. So you hit a hammer on an anvil. I can't take on Shabbos. It's muksa, granted, but I can't take a hammer and hit a piece of metal. Why not? What malacha am I violating? Answers the Gemara, Rabbi Rav Yosef Damri Tarvai, these two Amoraim, 4th century of Amoraim, 4th and 3rd actually, Rabbi and Rav Yosef, they say, you're practicing. So you're practicing, so practice counts. Good, a beautiful ashkafa. But the Gemara doesn't like this as an answer. Kashu ba b'nei Rechava. They asked on this, Elamayata, if you're saying that practicing anything that's going to enhance the final skill when you finally get up to the plate, okay, Elamayata, chaza umnasa b'shabsa v'gamar. If I watch, I can learn when I watch. So then maybe that should be a malacha too. Hachanami d'mechai. Maybe I should say that there too that's considered practice. No, that's ridiculous. That doesn't work. Ella, Abaye v'Rabba. We reject the answer of Rabbi v'Rav Yosef, and we revert to Abaye v'Rabba. What do they say? Da'amrei tarvayu. They agree. Shekain miradadei tase mishkan osim kain. What they would do when they were hitting on the anvil is like you see in the movies when they take a sword that is boiling hot, they stick it in the on top of the coal, and they soften the metal, and then they put it on an anvil, and then they hit it with a hammer. What they were doing, says the Gemara, is that they were flattening metal that they were using to cover the crushing. How do we know that it was covering the crushing? Because the Brisa says that about 12 lines down. Tanya Nami Hachi, we have a Brisa that supports this new opinion of Abaye and Rava, that the hammer was hitting metal sheets. Tanya Nami Hachi, the Brisa writes, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel Omer Af Hamake b'korna sa'ala sadan b'shas malacha. When a person hits a hammer on an anvil while they're doing their work, chayev. Why are you chayev? Shekain mirade. What were they hitting? They were being mirade. They were flattening out tase mishkan osin kain. That's what they were doing. And of course, the precedent from the Mishkan is critical, because without the precedent from the Mishkan, that it should be an Av Malacha. So here we see that you're going to be chayiv in such a case, and you're going to be chayiv for flattening out these Tasei HaMishkan, these sheets. Beautiful. 1/3 of the way down, Kuf Gimel Amud Aleph, that brings us to a new Mishnah. The Mishnah writes, Choresh Kolshu. Any degree of preparing the ground of plowing, there is no minimum shear, it is anything. The Mishnah adds, Ha-menachesh, veha-mekarsem, veha-mizared. These are all forms of weeding. They are defined as removing weeds. That's the first one. Menachesh is moving weeds. The second one is removing dead branches, kind of like zomer. And the third is moving wet leaves, which prevent good growth. So there too, kol shu chayiv, the shear is also very, very minimal. Ha-melaket eitzim, someone who is gathering up wood. This almost sounds like one of the melachos that we learned about on the Mishnah 9 Gimel. There's a melacha called me'amer, and me'amer is when you gather together sticks. Now, in fact, that's not what's happening here. That's not what, even though the words say that, melaket eitzim, it's not what it means, because if you read the next words, it says, im letakein kol shehein. If you're, whatever malaket eitzim means, it means to fix something, then kol shein. What does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Im letakin, just to the right, dibur hamaschil im letakin es ha'ila and o es ha'karka ukitzatzo min ha'mechubar. Here, we're not talking about emor, where we're gathering something, gathering apples that fell from a tree, gathering twigs that broke off during the storm. That's not what we're talking about. Says Rashi, this case in the Mishnah of Hamalakit Eitzim is talking about being mekatzet, something from that's mechubar. You're being mekatzet, something that's attached to the ground. So that's going to be in the realm of tolesh and kotzer. So in that case, if you break off wood, what's the shear for violation? Just to reframe according to Rashi's understanding, Malakit Eitzim, if you're gathering wood from that which used to be connected, im letakein, if it is going to fix something, so then it's kol shein, the shear is minimal. Im lehesek, if it's going to be used for firewood, then kedei levashel beit zakala, then the amount of wood which would be used as a fuel to burn a simple egg. Hamalaket asavim, someone who's going to tear out grass, similar parameters. Im lesakein kol shu, if it's to fix something, it's a very small amount. Im lebehema, and if you're using it as feed for an animal, then it's kimelo piagdi, it's the amount of asavim, of grass, that it would take to fill up the mouth of a gedi, which is not that big. I believe we said this was gegrogris. I didn't look this up, I just ring a bell, because I remember asking this question many blot ago on the top of an amud somewhere, that melo piagdi was considered a grogris. Okay, not for now. So that is the Mishnah. Let's see what the Gemara says. The Gemara says, I don't understand something. It says, Lamai chazi, chazi lebizra dekara. Lamai chazi, what? What's it fit for? What is choresh kol shu fit for? Let's say I move one crumb of dirt. I make the tiniest little hole in the ground to prepare it for planting. What good is that? Answers the Gemara, chazi lebizra dekara. It's perfectly reasonable that you can make one tiny little poke in the ground in order to plant one seed of a gourd, one seed of a pumpkin. They're not so big. You can make a tiny little hole, and that's why the shear is a kol. We had this as well in the Mishkan. Because you could have planted one of the items that would lead, that when it grows, it would become a dye to stain the ureos or whatever else was stained in the Mishkan, the big day kahuna, and then we could have planted even one stalk. That would have been a reasonable thing to do. What about this part of the Mishnah, ha-menachesh, veha-mekarsem, veha-mizared? We said that these were types of weeding. The first one is pulling weeds out. The second is removing dry wood, and the third is removing wet leaves. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon, ha-tolesh, ulshin, veha-mizared, zirudin, someone who separates these types of leaves. Im le'achila, if it's for the sake of eating, that's what you tore it out for, then kigrogris, of course, the shir of achila. Shir of achila is not really the right way to frame it. The amount of food that you need to carry out to violate when your desire is to eat, the amount of food you need to remove from the ground is going to be a grogris. Im lebehema kimlo piagdi, and if it's for an animal, then, as mentioned earlier by other foods, it just depends how much you can fit into the mouth of a gedi. Im lehesek, if it's going to be used as fuel, then kedei levashel beit zakala, similar parameters. Im liyapo sesakarka, but if it's just to clean up the ground, if it's just to make the yard look a little bit nicer. So let's say it's a fall day and there are wet leaves all over the grass. So you go outside, you remove all the wet leaves. It's liyapos. What's the shear for that? Says the Gemara, liyapos sesakarka kol shein, even one leaf. Wow, super strict. Even if you were to walk over to that leaf potentially and kick it with your foot, Now, maybe you'd be pater because that's not the derech with which we do these things. We do it with a rake. Fine, maybe it would only be an Isser D'Rabbanan, but that's a very sharp parameter. No raking on Shabbos for 100 reasons, but certainly for this one, it would not be appropriate. Asks the Gemara, I don't understand. You just gave me a whole bunch of parameters. You said that when you're tearing out all of these items, the ulshin and the zrad and these types of growths, that the shear depends on what you're doing. And the third shear you gave was that imel yapos, then it's a kolshu. Asks the Gemara, don't all of these things improve the way the field looks? Atu kulhu lo liapos esakarkaninu. Everything makes the field look better. When you take away weeds, the field looks better. When you remove this stuff because you want to feed an animal, it always makes the field look better. So I don't understand why you're making this distinction. All of them should have the shear of kolshu because all of them make the field look better. And that's liapos esakarka, which has a shear of kolshu. Answers the Gemara two different possibilities. Here's the first answer. Rabbi v'Rav Yosef, these two Amoraim, they say, Damrei tarvayu be'agam shanu. We weren't talking about an attractive field. You're down by a swampy area. The only way that removing something would be your intention to make it look better is if it was a swamp, which was unattractive and unappealing. Think Everglades, right? It's swampy, there's trees, it's marshland. If your intention is liyapos, you're removing things in order to make it look a little bit better, fine, then you're going to be chai with a kolshu, no problem at all. But all the other shiurim are not really liyapos, and therefore the shiur would not apply to other areas, only if your intention was liyapos. Abaye Omar, Abaye gave a different answer. Abaye said, no, it doesn't have to be a swamp. Afilu tema besada de lo agam, de lav agam, excuse me. It could even be a field that isn't a swamp. How so? The ukegon de lo kamechavein. Powerful idea. That yes, it's true that when I remove weeds, that it makes the field look better. But that's not why I'm removing the leaves. I don't care if the field looks better, and it may be my front lawn. But if I don't care, then I don't care. My kavana is a very, very powerful tool when it comes to Hilchos Shabbos. We know so many ideas about this. Meleches machshavas amar rachmana, meleches she'ein tzricha legufa, psik reisha de lo nichla. There's hundreds of things that when my intent changes, it changes the din. Yesterday we saw a Gemara that if you go 2 amos b'shogeg and then 2 amos b'mezid, so according to some that changes the din, because if 2 amos b'mezid, you can't be chayav a korban chatas if the last two steps you took were mezid. Your kavanah is very powerful. So Abaye is saying maybe it's not even ba'agam. Maybe it's in a regular field, but because your kavanah was not liyapos, so beautiful. So then the shear is not kolshu. I asked the Gemara, the Abaye v'Rabba, 2/3 of the way down. Abaye v'Rabba, Damar Tarbayu, they both say, Moder Reb Shimon, even Reb Shimon, who's the lenient, he agrees with psik reishe velo yamus. So whether or not you like it, when you remove those dead branches, when you do these things that make your field look beautiful, your kavana doesn't work to uproot psik reishe velo yamus. A psik reishe velo yamus is an act that will definitely lead to the result. So when I'm removing the dead trees, when I'm removing the wet leaves, by definition it's liapos. So how can Rabba and Rav Yosef give this answer that it's just talui on your kavana? Even Rav Shimon, who's the Mekel, would say that when it's a psik reishe velo yamus, that you're going to be chayev. Your kavana can't change that. So says the Gemara, just a crazy answer. The Rishonim here go wild, and we're not going to spend so much time because it's a shorter shear. Says the Gemara, lo tzricha, what must we be dealing with? We're talking about when you do this activity in your neighbor's yard, in your friend's yard. So what? So what, the Rishonim say? It's still a psik reishe velo yamus. You're still making the field look better. I don't understand. Answers Tosfos, the bottom Tosfos on the page, very, very simple. It says, Tosfos, Dibur Hamaschil, Be'ara Dechavre. How does this really answer the question? It should still be a psik reishe velo yamus. Says Tosfos, Pirush Dahavi Malacha Shenetzricha Legufa. A Malacha Shenetzricha Legufa removes the din deoraisa and drops us down, according to Rav Shimon at least, drops us down to a din derabanan, even when it's a psik reishe velo yamus. And that's how the Gemara answers this question. Rashi here has a very strange language that Rabbi Akiva Eger doesn't like. Take a look at the last Rashi on the page, 2/3 of the way down. Dibur Hamaschil Be'ara Dechavre. Rashi says, Lo ichpas le liyapos. He doesn't care. Rabbi Akiva Eger says, what kind of language is this? This is not like, what does it mean? It's a psik reishe velo nichale. So he concludes, I believe that's what he concluded, that he changes Rashi, doesn't change Rashi, but he says Rashi's intent is that it's a psik reishe velo nichale. And there is a shita We do not paskin this way. Don't go crazy. But there is a shita that says that a psik resha lo nichale, that when there is something that is automatic, the result is a malacha d'oraisa, hands down. No one's arguing. But it's lo nichali. I don't want your field to look nicer than mine. I don't want your yard to look nicer than mine. So then in that case, according to some, that's even mutter. Other sheets say, how can you say a psik resha de lo nichale is mutter? Hare, we never go from we never do this. We never go from psik resha de nichale is an isser d'oraisa or chayv kares. And then the next level down, psik resha de lo nichale, your mamish mutter. We don't do that. So there's some Rishonim who don't like that, but that is nevertheless explanations here of this unique Gemara. And that is, therefore, two valid answers. We asked the question of what about liyapos? Everything you're doing is liyapos, and we gave two answers. One was be'agam, that we're dealing with a place that isn't otherwise attractive, and you have to specifically have intention to make it look nicer. The second answer was abai v'rava, and that answer says it can even be in a sadeh as long as you don't have the kavanah to improve the field. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol nihye b'dvarav. Says the Mishnah. Let's jump into the malacha of kosef. Ha-kosef shtei osios bein b'yamino bein b'smolo. A person who writes two letters with their right hand or with their left hand. Bein mishem echad bein mishtei shemos. Whether or not it's two letters that are the same. Aleph aleph beis beis gimel gimel. Or bein mishtei shemos, like the name Noach, nun ches, two letters, two different letters. No matter what, you're going to be chayiv. Bein mishtei samanios, different types of ink, we don't care. Bechol lashon, in any language, fascinating. The answer is chayiv. In all of those cases, one is going to be chayiv. There is a shita in the Rishonim that the only time there's an isser deoraisa of writing on Shabbos is in ksav ashris, is in Hebrew. But if you wrote in English and Farsi and French and Russian, you would not be chayiv. We, of course, do not paskin that way. We paskin ladina, that if you write in any language, you will be chayiv. And we're going to continue more to see other sheetas. This is the sheet of the Tanakama. Amar Rabbi Yossi, nope, you're being too limited. Really, the Isser is more expansive than this house. So, lo chiavo shtei osios elamishum roshem. No, the Isser that we have in the Torah of writing is based on what happened in the Mishkan. And in the Mishkan, when they had the walls, they had let's say they had two parts of the wall that would touch one another. They'd make a mark on each of the walls, lav dafka letters. They'd make a mark on each of the walls that would indicate that these two pieces of the wall should be together. And even though each piece of the wall, each wall section was the same size, doesn't make a difference, because we needed them to make sure that that wall one was by wall two, because we have a principle called Malin b'Kodesh ve'ein moridin. So the pieces of the wall that were closer to the Mizbech, that were closer to the Kodesh, they could only be there. You couldn't move them further away because Malin b'Kodesh ve'ein moridin. So therefore, when we were taking apart the Mishkan and putting together the Mishkan, we followed a coding system. So what Rabbi Yossi is saying is that coding system could have been chicken scratch. It didn't have to be calculus. It just had to be something that indicated. It could have been, whatever. You could have made a smiley face over here and a sad face over there. It would have worked perfectly. So it says Rabbi Yossi in our Mishnah that it's because of Roshem Shekach Kosvin al Karshei Mishkan. This is what we did with the sections of wall of the Mishkan. Leda Ezo Ben Zugo, to know which wall was part of which wall. Amar Rabbi Yehuda Matzinu Shem Katan Mishem Gadol. Rabbi Yehuda says that it's even true that if you write part of a name, Shem Shimon v'Shmuel, the first two letters of Shimon is Shem, and of Shmuel is Shem. If you write Shem, Aser. We'll see tomorrow in tomorrow's daf, really at the end of the Amud Beis here, about what if you write a mem sofis versus a regular mem. The mem is incomplete, and that comes up halacha l'maisa. We'll discuss that. Nach mi nachor. The nun ches, which is really its own name. It's a very unique example that the Gemara gives us as an example, because after all, Noach is its own name. Nevertheless, nach mi nachor, if your intention was to write nachor and you just wrote nach, dan mi daniel, God mi gadiel, in all of these cases you would be chayav. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Opens the Gemara. Bishlama ayamin. Lechayev. I understand that if you are a right-handed person, that you should be held accountable. You're chayev. Why should you be chayev? Because mishum de derech ksiva b'kach, you're a righty. Of course you're going to be chayev. Ela asmol amai. But if you're left hand, it's not derech ksiva b'kach. Your left hand, you should not be chayev. Ha ein derech ksiva b'kach. We don't write with our opposite hands. So why does the Mishnah say that you're chayev with your left hand? Says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah be'itar yad shana. We're talking about an itar yad. Itar Yad is the language of the Gemara of the poskim to speak about a lefty. There is in fact a book called Itar Yad, all of the halachos of those who are lefties. Says the Gemara, what? If you're a lefty, then v'tehave smoldi de kimi de kuli alma. Then the question just flips on its head. Then the Mishnah would say that you're chai with your left hand because it's derech tziva b'kach, but with your right hand you would not. Uve'asmol lechayev ayamin lo lechayev. So saying that the guy is a lefty doesn't answer the question. It just reverses the question, but it doesn't answer the question. Therefore, Amar Abaye, we're talking about Bisholeth B'shtei Yadav. This person is ambidextrous. So when you have a person who can swing the bat in both directions, he can write with both hands. So then that's when it's going to be the case that you're chayiv in our Mishnah. But implies the Gemara, according to this answer of Abaye, that had it been taka, that you were a pure righty, that if you wrote with your left hand, it's taka true, that ein derech tziva b'kach. That's what's implied from the sheet of Abaye. Answer number 2 to this question of why is it that our Mishnah says that a person who writes with their left hand is going to be chayiv, says the Gemara, 10 lines from the bottom, Rav Yaakov Berei Debas Yaakov Amar Hamani, who is this part of our Mishnah? Like Rabbi Yossi, the Amar Lo Chiyav Ushtei Osios Ela Mishum Roshem, that really, if you're a righty, you shouldn't be chayiv on your left because it's not derech tziva b'kach. But it's Rabbi Yossi. What did Rabbi Yossi say in our Mishnah? We just need chicken scratch. We don't need you to write with calligraphy. We just need you to write in a way that's clear enough that we know what's what. It doesn't have to be words. Make a smiley face. That's great. If I could write my name with my left hand, it would be terrible handwriting. But dayenu, it's enough to make the walls, to make wall section 1, know where wall section 2 is. So therefore, says the Gemara, there must be that the Reisha, the beginning of our Mishnah, is Rabbi Yossi. Asks the Gemara, wait a minute. V'hamidis seifa Rabbi Yossi he. Later we detail a part of the Mishnah in the name of Rabbi Yossi. How can you say that the beginning of the Mishnah, where it talks about Yamin and Small, is also Rabbi Yossi? Why then later does it say his name in the beginning? It doesn't. Says Gemara, you're right. Let me finish the question. I skipped a little bit. Vami the Sefer Rabbi Yossi, Reisha Lab Rabbi Yossi. If the Sefer is talking about Rabbi Yossi, the Reisha, which says Yamin and Small, can't be talking about Rabbi Yossi. Answers the Gemara, Kula Rabbi Yossi. Really, everything is the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, going back to our Mishnah in the middle of the page here, at the bottom of the page here, Rabbi Yehuda said that if you write pieces of a person's name, Shem from Shimon and Shmuel v'chule, that you're going to be chayiv. Says the Gemara, wait a minute. El Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, shtei osios v'hein shnei shemos with mechayev. He holds that when are you chayiv? When you write the nun ches of Nachor. You write the shin mem of Shimon. Great. What's implied? Shtei osios v'hein shemecha lo mechayev. It's implied that the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda holds that if you write Aleph, Aleph, Beis, Beis, Gimel, Gimel, two of the same letters, that you would not be chayiv. That's what's implied, because what did he say was chayiv in our Mishnah? Shem from Shimon, Nach from Nachor, Dan from Daniel. So therefore, it's implied that if they're both the same letters, that you would not be chayiv. Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom of Tanya. I'm just going to let you know. This brisa starts here, obviously, 4 lines from the bottom. And if you flip the page, the brisa ends 3 lines before the wider lines. It's a very long brisa. It has 5 shitas in the Tanoim about this sugya. And of course, since we just focused on the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, our brain should be primed to pick up on the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. We'll see a contradiction, then we'll answer it, say a couple more things, and we'll end in a reasonable amount of time. Let us jump into this brisa. It says the brisa about Tanya. This pasuk is a well-known pasuk. We've learned it before. The pasuk reads, it's a pasuk by Korban Chatas, and the pasuk says at the end, "Ve'asa me'achas mehina," that you did from one from these. So ve'asa achas. What does the word achas mean? Yochol, I might have thought ad sheyichtov kol hashem, that you have to write the whole name, not just Noach but Nachor, not just Shem but Shimon. Ve'ad sheyarog es kol habeged, until you finish not just a couple of stitches, till you make the whole entire garment, till you weave the whole thing on the loom. Or be'ad sheyaseh kol hanapa, until you make the whole entire product. You're making the whole entire sieve. Talmud lomar the mem me achas. What does that teach me? That there's a measure in between 0 and 100 for which you would be chayiv. I.e. me achas. If the mem is there, that you don't have to make the whole product. Yochel afilu lo kasev ela os achas. Maybe if I only write 1 letter, you're going to be chayiv. V'lo orag ela chut echad. I only stitch 1 stitch. V'lo asa ela bayis echad benapa. I only do 1 part of the building of this particular filter. Maybe I would have thought you would have been chayiv in such a case for only doing 1 aspect of the iser. No, there's a balanced threshold turning to the top of kuf gimel amid beis. Talmud lomar achas. And what does it mean, the word achas? So the mem teaches us that it's not everything, and the achas teaches us that it's not nothing. Haketzad, what does this look like? Top of Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Shame katan mishem gadol. This is how we explain the shita that we just learned that in our Mishnah. That's how we got to this balance of shem mishimen. Shem katan mishem gadol. Shem mishimen mishmuel. Nach minachor. Dan midanil. Gad migadil. That is how the Tanakama holds. Next, Rabbi Yehuda. Remember, we got to be primed for this. What did we say by Rabbi Yehuda before we started? We said that it was implied by him that if there were two letters that were the same, they were mishem echad, shtei osios mishem echad, that you would not be chayiv. Says Rabbi Yehuda right here, 3 lines down on the top of Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, afilu lo kasav el shtei osios ve'ein shem echad. Even if they're both of the same name, chayiv kigon shin shin, sas, tas, rar, gag, chach. All of these are of the same letter. Rabbi Yehuda says you're chayiv. Stira Rabbi Yehuda's. But we're not yet going to hear the answer to this because we're going to finish learning the Brisa. That's shita number 2. Shita number 3. Amar Rabbi Yossi v'chi mishum kosev u'chayev. Writing isn't a parameter. This is going to, of course, reflect our Mishnah in the name of Rabbi Yossi. V'halo eino chayev ela mishum roshem. We only care about the chicken scratch. Whatever markings that you make, the letters are way beyond that, and of course you're chayev for that. But your Yossi's chiddush is that you're even chayev for the scratch marks. Shekain roshman al karshei mishkan leide ezu he ben zugo, as mentioned, because the karshei mishkan, the boards of the wall, so they needed some kind of markings to know where to go, because malin b'kodesh ve'moridin, you couldn't move the ones that were closer to the kodesh to a different place. Lefikach sarat tzrita achas al shnei nesarim. You'd make one line that crossed over 2 boards, or shtei tzritos al nasar echad, or you'd make a double line, Roman numerals. You'd make a double scratch, board 2. Connected to board 2, board 3, 1, 2, 3. Connected to board 3, 1, 2, 3. You'd be chayav. Reb Shimon Omer, fourth shita in this brisa. Reb Shimon Omer ve'asa achas. Seemingly already out of the gate sounds similar to the Tanakama. Ve'asa achas. Yachal ad sheyichtov es kol hashem ad sheyargas kol habeged ad sheyasses kol hanapa, like we saw on the bottom of the previous samud. Maybe havamina we have to finish the whole malach in order to be chayiv. Talmud lomar the mem mei achas ve'asa mei achas. The mem teaches me that no, it doesn't have to be the whole entire Isra to be chayiv. It could even be less. Okay, if it could even be less, if it is from the mem, then what might I have thought? Yachal, I might have thought, maybe if you only write one letter, if you only stitch one stitch or weave one weave, you didn't finish building the whole product that you're supposed to build. Maybe I would have thought you're chayiv for just a minimum. Says the Gemara, Tamalomar achas. Again, almost identical. The Gemara is going to ask this question. What's the difference between this shita and the Tanakama? They're almost identical. Ketzad? What does this case look like? Here, there's a slight difference in language from here to the Tanakama. Says the Gemara, Eino chayiv ad sheyasem malacha shekayote ba miskayemes. You're not going to be chayiv until you do enough of a maisa that it's miskayim. You do enough in order to make sure that it is going to remain. And then the Gemara ends with a drasha that falls back on the sheet of Rabbi Yossi. Rabbi Yossi Omer ve'asa achas ve'asa heina. This drasha we saw already. Pamim shechayiv achas al kulan. Sometimes you could do, you'll be chayiv one on many actions. Upamim shechayiv al kol achas ve'achas. End of brisa. And sometimes you could be chayiv on each one. Katani miha. 4 lines before the wide lines. Katani miha. What did we see in the middle of this brisa? Rabbi Yehuda Omer afilu lo kasav el shtei osios ve'ein shem echad chayiv. Stira. The Rabbi Yehuda that we had in our Mishnah implied that if you write 2 things of the same letter, you're pater. And here Rabbi Yehuda in this brisa says b'fem malei that you're chayiv if it's 2 letters that are of the same shape. Aleph aleph reish reish. Says the Gemara, lo kasha hadidei had Rabbi. Wasn't all his shita. Some of it was the shita of his Rabbi. He held one way like our Mishnah, and the other way was like his Rabbi. The Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda Omer mishum Rabban Gamliel. He quotes in the name of his Rabbi. Afilu lo kasav elo bezosos ve'ein shem echad chayiv. This brisa is like his Rebbe. Kigon sas, tat, rar, gag, chak. Whenever you write these 2 letters, you're going to be chayiv. That's how we answer up the question of Rebbe Yehuda. Wait a minute. Remember, as I highlighted, we were learning the brisa of Reb Shimon Hainu Tanakama, second of the wider lines. I don't understand. They're almost identical shitas. And if you want to say that if you write the letters of Aleph, Aleph, Azrecha, of that particular word in Sefer Yeshaya, Ikabeinahu, that word is the difference. Remember, you're not just writing Stam Aleph Aleph. You're trying to write the word, but you only wrote these first 2 letters of that word. The Tanakama Sabar Ela Aleph Aleph Azrecha Lo Mechayev. the Tanna Kama would hold that you're not chayiv. Reb Shimon Savar came with the Isay Begal Torah Be'alma chayiv, that because when people write incantations, remember we learned about incantations, that sometimes you write a small cloth with letters on it. They're not regular words. They're incantations. They're letters, garbles. You have no idea. We don't know what they mean when we look at them. Because there, Reb Shimon Savar came with the Isay Begal Torah, because they're written on these small parchments, Be'alma chayiv, then that if you want to say that that's an answer, that's a problem, because what does it imply? L'meimra, it implies the Reb Shimon the Chumrah. It implies that Reb Shimon is more charif, he's more sharp in halacha than the Tanna Kama, but that can't be. Vatanya, the Brisa writes, Hakodeh kol shu chayav. This is not yet Reb Shimon, it's the Tanna Kama. If you drill a hole, you're going to be chayav on a kol shu. Hamengarer kol shu, you scrape things off, kol shu, small shear. Hame'abed kol shu, if you're working leather, any amount. Hatzar b'kli tzura kol shu, you're drawing out, you're etching something out to make a design, any shear. Reb Shimon Omer Anshe Kadeches Kulo, very machmir, much more of a machmir shita. Much more of a mekil shita. You don't trigger the isser until further down the road, a more lenient shita. Ad she yigror is kulo, until you scrape off the whole thing. Ad she abed is kulo, until you tan all the leather. Ad she yitzar kulo, until you finish your drawing. So Reb Shimon is way more mekil, because the threshold of isser is way further down the road. So if that's the case, you can't say that in our case, by the Aleph of Ezrecha, that the Tanna Kama is lenient and Reb Shimon is strict. It just doesn't work. It doesn't make sense. That's not Reb Shimon l'shitoso. Ella Reb Shimon kulo. Rather, what do we learn from Reb Shimon? Reb Shimon is teaching us that you have to actually write the person's whole entire name. Shimon, Shin, Mem, Ayin, Vav, Nun, and then you're chayiv. Nothing short of that would be chayiv. Says the Gemara, Mimatzis Amris, can you actually say that? How can you say that about Tain? Reb Shimon Omer, kulo. Remember, we quoted this earlier, that maybe you would have thought that it's the whole name. Can't be. So we see that Reb Shimon says of his own self that doesn't work, because you might have thought the whole name, Talmud Lomar Me'achas. So we see that his drasha from the pasuk says that you're chayiv even less than the whole name. Even Shem Mishimon, you'd be chayiv. Answers the Gemara, you have to change the way we understood that line that we just said. Yachol. The Yachol line is different. It should say Yachol kulo. Maybe you would have thought that you have to write the whole pasuk, says Reb Shimon. Tamalomar me'achas, that no, you'll even violate the Isser if you don't write the whole pasuk, but if you write one whole word. And that explains the shita of Reb Shimon. One last section for the night, and then we'll pause. Rabbi Yossi Omer ve'asa achas ve'asa hena. The pasuk should have said, the pasuk says me'achas and me'hena. So what does this mean? It says the Gemara, pamim shechayev achas al kulan. Sometimes you're chayev one for many actions. Upamim shechayev al kol achas ve'achas. And what does Rabbi Yossi say? Amar Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina. This is an Amora who's explaining the Tana. The Amora Rabbi Yossi Reb Chanina. My time of Rabbi Yossi. What is the reason why Rabbi Yossi says this drasha? Because, and we saw this earlier in this Masechta. I can't remember where we saw it. We saw it earlier somewhere. Achas me achas, heina me heina. There's an extra letter mem both by me achas and me heina. What does that mean? Achas shehi heina. There's sometimes one that is representative of many. The heina she achas, and sometimes there's many that's representative of one. Where does it play out? Achas Shimon me achas shemi Shimon. The mem is more inclusive of an isser to say that even when you write the word shem, you're going to be chayiv. Heina is avos. Me heina is toldos. That we can say that one's going to be chayiv on both avos and toldos because of the mem. Achas shehi heina. What is a case of one that is many? Says the Gemara, Zadon Shabbos v'shigagas malachos. There you had one shigaga, you had one Zadon of Shabbos, but it leads to a lot of Yisurim because you're shigagas malachos. And every shogeg you're going to be chayiv. Heina shehi achas, a many which is one. What's the case of many which is one? Which is shigagas Shabbos. The Zadon malachos. When there's a Zadon, you don't bring a korban chatas. And that explains all of the shitas of the Brisa and explains the imminent concern that we had about Rabbi Huda as it relates to our Gemara by Kosev. We're actually going to stop here for the night. We'll start here tomorrow night, Emir Tashem, from Amar of Yehuda with Daf Kuf Dalad to learn a little bit more about the structure and beauty of the Aleph Beis. Wishing you all a beautiful night. Thank you so much for learning.